Today on the channel, I'm going to be talking about SlasherRipper, episode number 5. This episode, it's 49 minutes, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell you guys right off the bat that there is going to be spoilers in this review, and it's going to be kind of a recap as well. I feel after watching the first 4 episodes and kind of talking about them, I felt it was kind of hard to really talk about things and kind of dance around things. So I'm going to talk about certain spoilers in this episode. So if you don't want to be spoiled, go ahead and click off this video and come back to it. But if you don't care about spoilers, stick around and let's get to talk about this. So the episode, it opens up with a boy delivering chocolates during Valentine's Day. These chocolates, they're for Verity. Garvey is really having an affection towards Verity. The chocolates, they end up getting intercepted by Viviani. And then the scene cuts and we have George, the magician. He is sleeping around with Terence. And as you guys know, Terence is in a relationship with Salome. So you see Salome outside the door. She's really upset and she drops the food and she can hear them having sex. From that point on, the scene cuts and we're introduced to Miss Simcoe and the pastor. They're out on the streets. They're trying to be really good people. They're handing out apples, and this woman, she gets really ticked, and she says to her, well, a useful man would be much proper. And Miss Simcoe, she says that, she wants to do good and she wants to help the people, but unfortunately, she can't really do too much, I guess, at that time. But people are getting kind of restless out in the streets, and you're poor like that. So then we cut and we learn that the superintendent is dead, which we knew that from episode 4, that he was dragged. They see him dead on the streets, and of course we are introduced to another riddle from the widow. And this one, we have the detective wanting to talk to Miss Simcoe for a moment. And then we're cut back to the whole chocolates thing with Verity. And Garvey ends up coming into the door and he wants to be her Valentine. She says to him, well, look, I can't be your Valentine. I'm not going to betray my sisters. And in the background, we have Viviani. She is listening into the conversation and listening to her, respect her sisters, even though they're not respecting her and they don't really care about her. So she takes the high road in this. We start talking about this particular fabric that the detective actually discovers. They learn that Salome has wearing this fabric. And so they are thinking that Salome has something to do with the murder of the superintendent. And then they go to this store and they talk to the store owner. And the guy's name is Mr. Chow. He says that it's a particular fabric called Sherman fabric, and he doesn't sell it. And Miss Simcoe notices it right away. So then we cut to 12 years ago, and we have Salome talking with Margaret on the street, and we have this guy that approaches them, and he wants to have sex with them. And Margaret, she ends up declining, and Salome ends up taking this request, and they have sex, and they go behind the building. And when they're done, she's waiting to get paid, and he refuses to pay her. He insults her. He's very derogatory towards her, and he ends up cutting her face. So then we cut to present day, and we see that Salome, she's selling used women clothing and showing photographs of different men and making profits off of it. And then we have the detective come in, and he's talking to her about this Japanese fabric. He's very suspicious that she is behind the latest murders. And of course, Salome, she isn't really taken back by this. She's not offended. She really isn't taking it very serious. It's taking the detective off because he really has big suspicious ideas that Salome was behind these murders. We get Garvey, cutting to him, start to complain about the city and how people are smashing windows and people are roughing up delivery boys and such. And then we go to 12 years ago and we go back to the situation where Dr. Israel is cleaning the wounds of Salome, and then we get to meet Terence. And Terence ends up letting her stay. And then we cut to Venetia, and with the help of Salome, Garvey gets the photos of Verity. And so at this point, we get to see them trying to sell her sister into sex slavery, and of course, marriage as well. It then cuts to Terence washing George's feet, and they have a little bit of a conversation. And then a little bit sometime later, we have an argument with Terence and Salome because he finds out that she is trying to sell Verity. Obviously, she tells him that he's going to get a cut of the profits, but he gets really ticked by this because when he actually sells women into slavery, that's what they actually want. So they actually call each other a bunch of names, and Salome ends up killing Terence and stabbing him. A little bit short time later, we see that Terence's head is cut off, and Salome is doing an act on stage, and his head is cut off and placed on a platter. Dr. Israel, she ends up examining Terence and his head being cut off, and she says that the killer is right-handed this time. So different from the last episode because they thought the killer was left-handed. They also find out, obviously, that Terence wasn't in the photo that the detective has. So he's really thrown off as to why Terence was actually killed. There is a note that's left with Terence as well, and there's some misspellings too. So they're very confused because normally the widow has some very good handwriting and knows how to spell, and there's actual misspelled words. So then we end up seeing that Basil ends up giving Venetia the money for Verity. At this point, Viviana is very pissed about this because apparently Basil and Venetia, they had the meeting about selling off Verity, and Viviana was not included. And so we see Basil getting to Verity. She is not really keen to the idea, but she ends up saying to him, well, let me get adjusted to the idea about being with you. And that's where we kind of leave off with their relationship. And then we end up seeing Salome, and we get another flashback scene where she has humiliated Margaret in the past, called her some derogatory names and such. And then we see the widow appear in the room, and the widow ends up giving Salome some drugs, handcuffs her, and ends up cutting off both of her arms. And of course, she's screaming. She's kind of very hysterical, of course. But I'd say that's a very brutal scene. And I would say this is probably one of the more brutal killings that we've seen, I would say, in the past few episodes. I would say with this episode, I really like that we had a couple different killings. The fact that Terence was killed in this was really shocking because I really didn't see that coming. I think this episode really has a lot to unpack. I think that with the Salome backstory, I really enjoyed that about this episode. I felt that in-depth story was definitely needed to help with her character. And I thought that it was very interesting also that she was obviously getting cheated on, and just some of the things that her and Terence were doing as well. And I like, again, that we keep going back into these 12 years ago settings as well and learning more about Margaret in each episode. That's really cool to really see on screen as well. The Verity situation, I honestly have felt for a while now that the sisters didn't really care about their sister as a whole. So I'm not really shocked, I would say, that they tried to sell her on sex slavery, and of course trying to get her married off to Basil. You can really tell that they never cared about her, so that was made very clear in this episode. I think with that backstory, or that side story I should say, I actually like that side story. I think that it really does show that these sisters from the past up till now, they just all are about money. They really don't care about anybody. They're all about themselves. And this episode proved that. So as far as wrapping up my thoughts on this, I think this was a really good episode. I like the backstory. I like the brutal kills, especially the ending kill, and leaving it on a cliffhanger like that as well. The detective here, I think it is kind of funny how he handles this case and how he accuses certain people of doing certain things. And I feel like he's kind of a funny character in this position. I wouldn't say like he's out of place, but I just feel like some of his dialogue and line delivery and how they build him as a character and as a detective, I don't know, like sometimes it doesn't seem like it really works for me at times, but I feel like his character definitely is very much easy to judge, I guess, to think that somebody did something. It's like any speck of evidence really turns him to thinking that somebody is actually the killer. But I also think because everybody's on edge in the town and how they've been through each episode, everybody's really quick to think that somebody's the killer over small clues. But those are my thoughts on Slasher Ripper episode number 5. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this episode. Did you like this episode? Did you hate it? Was it kind of meh? Was it too much filler for you? Let me know down in the comments and what your predictions are for episode 6. Thank you guys for listening, and I will see you guys on my next review.